Dumelang. Welcome to Face the Nation with myself, Clement Banyatela. Thank you for being with us here on SABC News. We're live to you on the eve of elections from the National Results Operations Center in Midrand, which is the nerve center, really, where results are coming in from all the voting stations. They are collated and published. On the show tonight,
our clarion call to all South Africans is, let's go out in huge numbers and vindicate our democratic right to vote.
Day 1 and day 2 of special votes is done and dusted as the IEC calls on all registered voters to come out in their numbers tomorrow. So with hours to go before the polls open at 7 a.m., how ready is the IEC for the big day? The IEC's Deputy Chief Electoral Officer, Masego Shiburi, will face the nation tonight. Also on the show, safety and security is crucial for free and fair elections. Already our law enforcement agencies have had their hands full in Mthatha in the Eastern Cape and other parts of the country where incidents of violence were reported. Police Minister Becky Cele will tell us how law enforcement will ensure a safe voting day. And then later, the IEC has faced several challenges leading up to tomorrow's voting day, from court challenges, attacks on its integrity, and allegations of bias. How much of that has truly impacted on the electoral process and this crucial institution responsible for administering elections? In other words, how has the IEC fared in the preparation and conduct leading up to tomorrow? Dr. Ongama Mtimka and Dr. Stembi Lembete are joining us for that conversation. But first, my comment. So I would like us to reflect this evening on how crucial this moment is. Political parties have done their work trying to persuade you and I to convince us to vote for them. But that time is now done. This is your moment, our moment. The power is now firmly in our hands, and I hope you don't take it for granted. This is one of the few times, actually, that politicians are scared because they have no control over this moment. They have done their part to influence your vote, but they don't have control over how you are going to exercise your right. Yes, maybe you attended their rallies. Maybe you own a particular party t-shirt. But no way does that guarantee which way you will vote. And that is what scares them. And you and I know that politicians don't get easily scared. But tomorrow, as you go out to vote, they're going to be scared. So take advantage of this moment. We have seen Nelson Mandela before talk about the importance of voting in 1994 when we voted for the very first time as black and white South Africans. In fact, Albie Sachs, who is the former justice in the Constitutional Court, who is also a freedom fighter, had this to say as he was reflecting on the importance of voting.
Before people are so quick to throw stones at the IEC and the courts and so on, imagine if we didn't have elections. It would be assassination, it would be torture, it would be fighting, it would be the powerful, the richest, the bullies, the corrupt, it would be rampant. We have elections as a means of expressing our content or our discontent. It's central to peace in this country. It's not just holding government to account. It's more profoundly important than that.
Now, that's how important your vote is. You have the power to choose the leaders this country needs, the power to shape the future of this nation through your ballot. So let's recognize this moment for what it is. But also let's recognize deliberate attempts to undermine the integrity of these elections. There are people out there who will try and discredit the IEC. They may make false claims, they will spread fake news, and all attempts will be made to discredit the electoral process. And yes, we need to be vigilant and flag any issue that arises that has the potential to impact the credibility of the elections. But equally so, we need to be careful of instigators, of hooligans who want this whole process to be discredited before it even begins. So let's not spread things on our WhatsApp groups until we are 100% sure that they are confirmed and verified. Don't be complicit. Don't retweet things when you are not sure. The IEC this evening made an appeal for all of us to respect their officers at polling stations.
The Commission remains concerned with incidents of unlawful conduct directed at its operations or against electoral officials.
Now, this is our moment. Let's run with it. Here's the question I'm asking you tonight. As the nation heads to the polls, what makes this election in particular significant for you? You can send us an X on @FaceTheNation SABC. What makes this particular election significant for you? We'll read your tweets throughout the show tonight. All right, so the Independent Electoral Commission's Chief Electoral Officer, Sai Mamabulo, has expressed concern regarding incidents of unlawful conduct ahead of the polls. South Africans are heading to the polls tomorrow for what many describe as the most closely contested elections of the democratic era. Voting stations will be open at 7 a.m. and close at 9 p.m. tomorrow. Let's bring in the Deputy Chief Electoral Officer, Masego Shiburu, who is facing the nation with us tonight. Mr. Shiburi, thank you so much for making time for us. I want to start off with something perhaps that was concerning that Mr. Sai Mamabulo mentioned, that there's a clear orchestration to undermine the outcome of the elections. Is it party leaders that are clearly, deliberately trying to undermine the electoral process?
We've never been in this situation, and we've run a number of elections. A few days before election day, we had no fewer than 11 cases in the Constitutional Court, all of them impugning the integrity or the processes of the Electoral Commission. Those matters did not end there. Even beyond the court processes, we've seen people who took the law into their own hands to try to enforce what we did not understand as conduct that interfered with our electoral processes. The election process is transparent. The transparency is at the level of a voting station. All the materials are accounted for at the voting station. The voter's role is built up from a level of a voting station. So there is no need, indeed, for people to take the law into their own hands, to accost our official, to invade our storage facilities, because all the materials find the expression at the voting station. The accountability happens at the voting station.
Do you have information of which members of political parties have been behind that? Because I think it helps when you're also calling on party leaders to rein in their members and understand how the processes works, to avoid a situation where they will somehow threaten your officers at polling stations or raise questions about ballot papers that are moved around when they don't understand that it's normal standard procedure. Are there members of political parties you are aware were responsible for these incidents?
From our part, we take it that it is an unlawful act, whether it is committed by a person representing a political party or it is an action of a Joe public. We have liaison structures with political parties at which we describe all our processes, including how we handle material. So this action is totally out of character with the role of political parties that they've played up to this far. But we consider these things as an affront to free and fair elections, whether they are at the instance of a political party or a member unaffiliated to a party.
You've raised concerns of incidents of unlawful conduct directed at your officers. What impact does that have on the execution of their responsibilities? And do they have the support of law enforcement when these kind of incidents transpire?
Indeed, we work very closely with the South African Police Department, but we could ill afford this type of incidents. And for example, it is not a nice experience for a person to be woken up in the middle of the night at their place of safety called a home, dragged out of bed, dragged out by unknown persons to themselves to a facility where people think that we're storing material when that was not in fact the case. So even when the police intervene, we can't imagine the trauma that a person has gone through being subjected to those circumstances.
What's your message to political party leaders this evening?
The message to party leaders is that you know the processes of the Electoral Commission. You have party agents. At the level of a voting station, that is where all the accountability happens. If something happens that is wrong, you raise it at the voting station during the voting process, during the counting process, but there's also an opportunity to raise objections that are material to the outcome of the election post the election. Additionally, if you are not happy with the actions of staff of the Electoral Commission or even commissioners of the Electoral Commission, parties have recourse to the Electoral Court, which exists to consider all electoral matters.
Okay, so day 1 and day 2 of special votes were almost like a rehearsal for you as the IEC. It helps you at least attend to some of the teething problems ahead of the big day tomorrow. What are some of the teething problems you saw yesterday and today that were most concerning for you as the IEC that you want to ensure that you address? I mean, earlier on, we spoke to the APC, a political party that says there was a special vote today where one of the people who wanted to vote for a particular party was in fact persuaded to vote for another party. I'm told that that's a complaint that they've escalated to the IEC. But there have been other teething problems where people go and as they are about to vote in their special vote, they appear on the voters' roll but not on your digital system. Are you aware of this? And if you've got others that have been concerning teething problems over the last 2 days, what are they and how are you fixing them?
Indeed, in a exercise of a magnitude of an election, there will always be issues. There will always be aberrations, even with the best of training. We operated in 22,600 voting stations yesterday to administer special votes to 1.6 million South Africans. We estimate that over 900 people have voted at their voting stations. Indeed, there have been issues, for example, the misuse of envelopes. A voter must be given 2 envelopes in which they cast and they mark their ballot, and they include their marked ballot into the envelopes to ensure the secrecy. There have been instances where those have not been implemented. There have been other instances where instead of using 2 envelopes for a voter, each ballot was inserted in a separate envelope, which meant that they would run out of ballot paper, out of envelopes, and end up depositing ballots without envelopes directly into the ballot box. Okay. We have had instances where stations opened late because of delay in escorts. We've had instances where stations had to close temporarily because either people had mislaid the voters' roll or they've mislaid any of the materials. On our part, we are certain that we have the mechanisms to track all the materials, and all the aberrations were not because of shortages of material, but it was mishandling and human error at the instance of some among ourselves.
Yeah. Let's talk about voter education now. Do you think that you had done a sufficient job as the IEC? And I'm asking that because I don't know what would determine what would pass as sufficient. Because 2 things that were concerning for me, Mr. Shiburi, is already 2 months before the elections, one, a lot of South Africans didn't know about the 3 ballots. Either South Africans were ignorant and they were not paying attention to some of the campaigns we were running to explain the 3 ballots, or you didn't do a good job in really drumming up that message and getting people to understand how the law has changed and why now you've got the 3 ballots. And the second issue is around the voting stations. There are some South Africans who thought that the old system still applies, where you can still go to any voting station and vote for the national ballot. Of course, after the 2021, there was changes to the laws that now dictate that you can only vote at a station where you are registered. So which is it? Is it that the media didn't do a good job, the IEC didn't go far enough in voter education, or as South Africans, we were simply not paying that much of attention?
Let's put it this way. We have finite resources placed at our disposal. We do the best to use those optimally. The scheme of the law changed in April last year. There would not have been a point to deal with the 3 ballots then. So we linked the 3 ballots to balloting education when an election had been called. In the previous phase, our focus had been on voter registration because we were compiling a voter's roll. So there is almost a cycle to these things where we link our resources with the phase of an electoral cycle that we are under. We think we did a pretty decent job given the resources that we have. From our research, voters tell us that they prefer television, they prefer radio as primary source of information. We also do face-to-face interaction with voters to bridge issues of illiteracy, to bridge issues of lack of access to those primary resources that other people prefer to have information on. Could we have done more? Indeed we could.
Yeah, and maybe even as us as South Africans as well, I need to be more responsible because during voter registration drives, I mean, some people have said, oh, but I didn't know that I'm not supposed to vote here. But if you paid attention to voter registration weekends, you were given ample time to actually register and check also the status of where you're going to be voting from. Just lastly, tonight during your briefing, you indicated that out of the 1.6 million registered voters for the special vote, about 900,000 or so cast their ballots. Are you satisfied? Because it feels like to me we could have done better in terms of voter turnout.
Indeed, we think we will show an improvement once those ballots are counted. The 900,000 is a conservative estimate of people who voted at their voting station because we have technology there. We know the number of ID numbers to which we have issued a ballot. There are 600,000 South Africans who voted by special vote at a home or a place of confinement. Those figures are not included in the 900,000.
Ah, so it could go higher?
It could still go higher, yes.
Okay, that's good to know. That's good to know. Thank you so much for making time for us. The Deputy Chief Electoral Officer, Masiro Shiburi, speaking to us, of course, about their briefing this evening. Out of the 1.6 million registered voters for the special votes, there are a number of people that came out on day one and day two, and he says they are ready for the big day tomorrow when the polling stations open at 7 a.m. Coming up after the break on Face the Nation, Police Minister Becky Cele is going to talk to us about safety and security because that is crucial in free and fair elections. Stay with us here on SABC News. Welcome back to Face the Nation. The eThekwini municipality in KwaZulu-Natal has been identified as the area with the highest number of high-risk voting stations. Other areas identified as hotspots by the security cluster for these elections include Amajuba, uThukela and Zululand. In the Eastern Cape, the voting stations in King Sabata, Dalindyebo and Amahlati local municipality could not open for special votes today due to community protests. IEC officials were also unable to conduct home visits due to threats by communities. So are our law enforcement officers ready for the big day tomorrow? Police Minister Becky Cele is facing the nation tonight from our Durban studio. Minister, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Let's start with the Eastern Cape in Mthatha. Is the situation there now stabilized?
Good evening to you, Dad Manyatela, and the listenership as a whole. Mthatha is tip-top. The situation actually was contained yesterday. By the time we went to sleep, everything was in order. The only thing that was left were debris and those things that were put on the road. But all the exits and entrance were open and, from the city center or town center. And all people that have caused the trouble have moved away. There have been the arrest by that time. Unfortunately, there were some injuries. There is one death that we are determining how it happened. But to put things in more order, there was a meeting today between the taxi industry with the MSC and Minister Stella Ndabeni. But to put cherry on top, the head of the defense in the Republic of South Africa and the head of the South African Police Service, they're from that town and everything is in order. Everybody has committed that it was a mistake, as they say, but everything is full swing,
Yeah.
and we are ready to go.
Okay, so the Premier of the Eastern Cape, Oscar Mabuyane, says that what happened stems from KwaZulu-Natal. He suggested that this is something that was planted in the Eastern Cape for a reason. In fact, he suggested there's a third force. He says guns that were confiscated from the taxi owners are actually owned by businesses that are situated in KwaZulu-Natal. Why do you believe that there is some foul play here?
Well, Premier has a right to speak politics as he sees it. Speaking on behalf of the South African Police, we are led by investigations, not about what people say, the stories, things written on the papers or hear from the news. What we have investigated are the firearms that are carried by the private security companies. It's a mix of security companies. Unfortunately, I don't know why, majority of them, they come from KZN, but there are those that they originated from the Eastern Cape. So here was a problem of firearms that were taken to the wrong place. Everybody and anybody knows that you can't take a firearm to hospital, to school and all that. Those, even if they are legal, they become illegal. We had to confiscate them. Once the guns are confiscated, we have to go through them ballistically to check if they have not been used illegally. Well, fortunately, we had the capacity and we prioritized them, and the guns went through. There are those that have not been given back to the owners, but there are those that have been given back to the owners. And we'll continue to check those that we suspect they might have in foul play, not necessarily at Umtata, but anywhere else that have been illegally used. But the question of the firearms to us is not whether they come from KZN or anywhere, is that are they legally there? Have they done what they're supposed to do? If not, we confiscate and arrest the owners.
Yeah, I mean, what happened there in Umtata, Minister, looks like the violence was quite extreme. It was unprecedented. But there's evidence that this kind of violence is actually on brand, which what often happens with the taxi violence in the Eastern Cape. Have the police not failed to do what they were supposed to do in the past when there was this kind of violence between taxi operators and of course Intercape, the bus company? I'm reminded now of how Intercape has gone to court several times to try and get the police to intervene. There was a time when there was an application brought following the failure of the SAPS and the Hawks to investigate the more than 175 criminal cases that Intercape apparently opened with the police. And even the National Police Commissioner, Fanima Samola, and his Eastern Cape Commissioner were declared to be in contempt of court at some point for failing to implement earlier court orders to protect Intercape buses from 8 years of what appears to be unrelenting attacks from taxi operators. So have you failed as the police to deal with this issue, and that is why it's flaring up the way it is now?
Well, I would not agree with you when you say the Umtata was the worst when it comes to the question of the taxi violence. Taxi violence is got some element of national kind of approach. There are worse provinces than others indeed. Western Cape, Eastern Cape, KZN, Gauteng, and now and again it would be Mpumalanga. But those four are most notorious when it comes to the taxi industry. People have died. Maybe we forget that Mpangen at one time, 18 people, though some time ago, they died. And you remember the big war between the municipality and the taxi industry at Umtata, in Cape Town recently. The question of the taxi industry is two. There are many people that have been arrested for violence in the taxi industry. But the problem with the taxi industry, by the time it comes to the police, it has been the issue of transport, basically. Let me put it this way. For instance, people, they fight over ranks, Manyantela, and those ranks are not given by the police, are given by the municipality.
Yeah.
And sometimes there is piling of different associations on that, and they fight over that, and the police, they come in the tail end. The second one are the route themselves that are not given by the South African Police Service, but given by either provincial, if national, by national transport department, and the police come to the tail end of that problem. But many people, I don't have numbers, they have been arrested, and many others, they do life sentence for that particular industry. It flares up indeed. Umtata issue, we were quick to respond. We could have, the information was there, but as you asked the police, they said they did speak with the industry, and they checked their firearm. They were supposed to bring their firearms, and everybody goes home. And they instead of the next morning, they did what they did. But as you know, that by the time, the end of the day, we have dealt with the thing decisively. When it comes to the bus issue, that's a long one. Maybe one cannot tell the story as full, but the bus company has a responsibility themselves to guard their buses when they realize that there is a problem. Yes, we have been taken to court. Yes, the other court have said we are responsible, but we have taken and we are appealing that matter because we don't believe that the court that taken decision and the concept of court is correct. So we have taken the thing on appeal. We believe that the different court will rule differently.
What do you mean? What are you appealing exactly? Are you against the court saying you have a responsibility to protect Intercape buses from what often seems to be violence from the taxi operators? Do you not think that's the responsibility of police?
The responsibility of police, that Manyatela, is to protect all South Africans, including Intercape. But the businesses also, they do protect themselves, working together with us. And there were those working together with the Intercape between the South African police and the private security that have been there. There were things that they would be advised to work on them so that the situation is better. Themselves, there are stories that they don't tell, like that they have negotiated with those people of the taxi industry and they were comfortable with that. When things change, then they begin to run to the police. Those are the matters we say, if we all take the legal route of dealing things, let it be so. Don't mix.
You spent the day visiting some of the voting stations around KwaZulu-Natal. We know of the concerns that have been raised in the past about some hotspots in that province. What did you find during your visit today?
Well, let me say, from yesterday and today and until the announcement of the results, we meet as a South African police and ministry with the National Commissioner, deputies, divisional commissioners, and all provincial commissioners, and we scan the country. That leads to better understanding on different areas. Indeed, KZN, as you have said, eThekwini and other areas, and Eastern Cape, especially the east of Eastern Cape, your Bizana, was at Bizana yesterday, your Mount Elif and all those, the Makusheni, place Pagate, Mtata and the Dujwa, and other places in Mpumalanga, a few of them. They are a concern. Moving around the stations today, yes, there are things that we need to take an extra look at. And fortunately, yesterday and today were good rehearsals, so we know. I was talking to even the provincial commissioner before I came here. We know which station that we need to shift the extra members of the South African police, but we also have the reserve to push to those particular stations if there is some form of the flare-up. We've got more than 17,000 members of the South African Police Service in this province, so we believe that we are adequate. We believe that the response will be fine. What we have taken and we have instructed the police to do is that issue just a response, and our job is to enforce the law as the Constitution instructs us, and uphold the law, not to negotiate. Any party and every party that breaks the law, it doesn't matter who you are, will have to be tough and enforce the law against that person.
Do you have concerns about Mpumalanga as well?
Well, in Mpumalanga, something happened today. Listening to the provincial commissioner, though in a minor scale, but they're investigating, I think, 1 or 2 areas where there could be a violation of the act. But Mpumalanga will be quite minimal than these 4 provinces, which is again is your Western Cape, which I must say not very bad, like Eastern Cape, KZN, and Gauteng, and maybe a little bit of northwest. I think Western Cape would be even better. But the 3, which is Eastern Cape, KZN, and Gauteng, are problematic.
All right, Police Minister Bheki Cele, thank you so much for joining us on Face the Nation tonight. Remember, the question we are asking you tonight is, as the nation heads to the polls, what makes this election in particular significant for you? You can send us your tweets at Face the Nation SABC, and then we'll read those as we continue with the show. After the break, we're going to look at how the IEC has fared. It's faced a number of court challenges. There have been attacks on its integrity, on its credibility. There are people that have claimed some allegations of bias as well. So how is the IEC fared in its preparation leading up to this big day tomorrow? Dr. Ongama Mtimka and Dr. Stembile Mbete are joining me for that chat after the break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Now, the Independent Electoral Commission has encountered numerous challenges in the lead up to tomorrow's voting day. These challenges include court disputes, attacks on its integrity, and allegations of bias. But how much of these challenges affected the electoral process and the crucial role of the IEC in administering elections? So how has the IEC performed in its preparation and conduct leading up to tomorrow's big day? Dr. Ongama Mtimka and Dr. Stembile Mbete are joining me in studio to discuss this and other issues. The wonderful doctors, welcome to Face the Nation. Thank you for making time for us.
Thanks for having us.
I want to start with something that I thought was at least concerning to me, what Simon Mamabulo said during a briefing, that there's a clear orchestration to undermine the outcome of the elections. And I spoke to his deputy, Masero Shiburi, who says they've never seen anything like this since they started administering elections back in 1994. I'll start with you, Dr. Stembile Mbete. Should we be concerned about that?
Well, look, I think that the more contested an election is, in terms of the political contestation, where you're not sure who's going to win, where there are different parties or different candidates that are really vying, where it's not obvious what the outcome is going to be. The more contested an election is, the greater the scrutiny there is on the election management body, so on the Electoral Commission, and the more temptation or the more attempts there are to politicize the work of that election management body to then be able to dispute the result in any way. We see this happen all over the world, not just in South Africa. I think that for the IEC, which is an organization, it's an excellent body, election management body, really one of the top in the world, and that has had its credibility accepted for decades, right? For as long as it's been around. Countless Afrobarometer studies by the HSRC over time have shown that the IEC has the greatest level of trust of any of our public institutions. It's been the IEC and the courts, neck and neck, but with the IEC really being one of the most trusted institutions. But what we've seen is that as our political environment has become more fractious, more contested, and as overall trust in anything that sounds like a government institution has declined amongst the public, the IEC has then been a victim of that in some ways, so to speak, been subject to that fall of trust and that decline in trust more generally.
Yeah.
But then around a very contentious election like this one is, where people really want to make sure that they are the ones that win and that succeed, every move of the IEC will be put into question and will be doubted because the competition is so hot. And some of that is done in good faith, but there's a lot of it that's done in bad faith.
In
as
bad
well.
faith, which then Dr. Mtimka says the IEC, the focus is on how they respond and deal with these issues, whether the issues are raised in bad faith or that's genuinely what people are concerned about. How do you think they've fared? I mean, there have been court challenges on Zuma's eligibility. There was an issue with Janet Love, one of the commissioners, and whether or not she should have made the comment. How do you think the IEC has done in dealing with these objections, but also these issues that have been lurking around this institution, sort of threatening, so to speak, the integrity of the process and the institution?
So I think it's shown a significant degree of behavioral complexity, which has been necessary to try and fend off any allegations that they are handling these matters in ways that seek to position one party to succeed against another. So, for example, they defended their decision to accept Mkhonto weSizwe party as a contestant, as a party in this election. And I doubt that it escaped them at any point during the process that they were administering this, that the candidature of former President Jacob Zuma might come into question. But they knew politically what would be, this is my hypothesis, what would be politically savvy to do. So they let the issue of his candidature be raised in an objection process rather than them voluntarily acting. So when it was then raised in an objection process, it gave them an opportunity to exercise what would have been effective control anyway, to say, we uphold this decision. Now, the issue for me is, what did they then do when they were being challenged? In one instance, they defended their decision to accept MK party, notwithstanding some of the issues that were raised by the ANC as an aggrieved party. That's one. Secondly, to show that theirs was not about MK party per se, but about the application of rules. They defended their decision to even uphold the objection against the candidature of President Zuma. So I'm saying they have shown a degree of objectivity. And one would have thought that when they lost at the Electoral Court, because they are sensitive to the politics, they would have cowered to the intimidation that's been coming from MK party and not actually challenge the wrongness of that decision by the Electoral Court. They actually did. So I've been presenting some workshops in the electoral observer space, and I made the point that a butterfly must flap its wings, even if it knows that that very act may be the initial conditions for a tornado elsewhere. And I think that this is what they've done. They've refused to cower to political pressure, and as a result of that, in my view, to South Africans who can think, not those who are being manipulated, they are acting in good faith. So to the point that, to the discussion that you and Stay were having earlier, I think that how we interpret events, mistakes, things that don't go according to plan, is a function of, first, the objective reality there, but also the constructed reality. And the constructed reality is when politicians attempt, within this competitive environment that Dr. Mbete is talking about, attempt to frame what otherwise may be the ordinary failure of things, as things would fail sometimes, as if there's a malicious intent. And that's what should be guarded against. Not every allegation has got to be responded to, but there are some by senior politicians who are powerful that actually need to be taken to task.
Speaking of politicians, Dr. Mbete, to use your analogy, how have the political leaders been sort of flapping their wings? Because it's not just the responsibility of the IEC, whether you talk about voter education or you want to create an environment that's free and fair. for the elections. Sometimes political parties, in their messaging, in their address during rallies, they rile up the crowd, and sometimes they do it deliberately so that they're well positioned, that when they don't get, I mean, Umkhonto Wesuze claimed, we're gonna get, 60% of the votes. And they start preaching that message, and then they start questioning the integrity of the election, so that when they don't get that, they're able to say, but we told you so. What is the responsibility of political party leaders? I mean, the ANC, when the IEC leaked their list, I thought they handled the matter somewhat okay. They didn't go out and say, this institution is doomed. They said, we still have confidence in it, but we're saying this is what they have to fix. What have you observed?
Well, I've seen that a lot of, that there's been a few political parties and some of the new entrants, I think also, the ones who were sort of questioning around why their lists weren't accepted and other people's were. And it's pointed to something that's been quite concerning for me, that you've got people who are wanting to play in the electoral political space who haven't learned the rules of the game.
Yes.
It's like trying to play. It's like me trying to play a football. I know nothing about the rules of soccer, and it's like me trying to play.
And when the referee says, you're like, oh,
and then complaining with the referee that why did you? No, that was a goal.
Yeah.
And so there's something, I know nothing about the offside rule, you know, but that I insist that it's a goal.
Yeah.
And so there's something about that. There's been a lot of new entrants that have come in and not actually learned what the rules of the game are, and then what they need to work by. The second thing is that there have been more established parties, or people that should know better, that have created an environment where if the election doesn't go the way that they're promising their supporters that the election is going to go, that the question should be on the IEC, not on that particular party and their campaigning, or whether they've got good policies or anything. And then the last thing is that I think that the represented parties in the National Assembly, so the parties who were elected in 2019, who've been in the National Assembly this whole time, also need to take some responsibility, because the IEC has had budget cuts over the last 3-4 budget cycles. It's lost about R1 billion in budget. This year, the IEC's budget was cut by 280 million rand.
With the additional responsibilities of independent candidates,
of an additional set of ballots. So now there's 3 ballots instead of 2. And think about that. The IEC prepares for the whole voters roll. So there were 3 ballots for 27 million voters. That's about 83 million ballots that needed to be printed. In 2019, you would have needed around 52 million ballots printed, maybe 60 million for a few extra, because you had 2 ballots. So with extra ballots, with more voting stations, there's 23,292 voting stations. I think there's about 1,000 more voting stations this year than there were before. And the IEC has done that effectively on less money in real terms than it had in 2019. And so the parties that were in the National Assembly who accepted this budget, who accepted these funding cuts to the IEC, I think also need to take some responsibility for the context then that this election is happening within. And the point is that if we want the IEC to do all of these nice things, the voter education, the preparing people years in advance for what's going to happen, then the environment needs to be set up that way. They need the budget to do it. They need laws to be passed in a sensible way. Remember that the IEC does not set the law, does not create the legal environment within which it operates.
It functions,
It is politicians who design those laws and who pass those laws.
Yeah, and we saw some delays even in the Electoral Act after the Constitutional Court gave directives. There were some delays in just firming up everything so the IEC can start with its work. Dr. Mdinga, speaking of voter education, I asked Mr. Shiburi about the issue of voting stations, because I was surprised to see, I saw you address it on social media as well, Stembile, where people say, I didn't know this year that things are different to 2019. I thought I would walk into any other station and vote on the national ballot. And yet there were rules in 2019 that changed. And I asked Mr. Shiburi whether, as the IEC, they did enough voter education, and maybe even political parties, or if as South Africans, to some degree we were a little ignorant and we were not paying too much attention. What is your observation on especially these two issues of the 3 ballots, which 2 months ago people were like, oh, there are 3 ballots, when the IEC had already started communicating it, but also the issue of voting stations?
Yeah, so I think that it's a combination of things. One, we weren't paying attention when I saw adverts go out on social media. I don't know with the other mass media platforms, but I would assume they did. Interestingly, the message was also augmented by non-profit organizations. It's interesting, in my own circles, I saw videos that were done by colleagues like Tessa Dooms, trending just yesterday actually in various social media groups, where people in response were saying, please spread these messages wide. We didn't know about these, especially 3 ballots and all of that. So I think it's a combination of factors.
Okay.
I think what Dr. Mbete is highlighting about the budget cuts to the IEC explains part of the story. It explains a lot in terms of the story, but also the fact that it's a system, that we're dealing with. You cannot determine the success based on one constitutive part of the system. Because even political parties should be out there educating their potential voters themselves, Yeah.
But they don't want to do that.
Can I say something just around the Section 24A? So this thing that you can't vote at another voting station. Remember in 2019 when there was all of those concerns around people having double voted and all sorts of other things, and politicians went to the IEC. Remember, there's a party liaison. It's now a what do they call it? They're not calling it it's a political liaison committee that includes both political parties and now independent candidates of the IECs, where parties can directly engage with the IEC. And part of that, what came out of those engagements in 2019 is that we need to find a way to prevent this. And so then they amended the Electoral Act, and it was politicians in Parliament who did this. In 2020, to then add this 24A amendment that said that you needed to inform the IEC in advance if you want to vote elsewhere. And so that's where this comes from. But remember, what was happening in 2020? COVID. It was in the middle of the pandemic. There was very little public attention on that. I think the meetings on this happened in Parliament between September and December of 2020, and then it got lost in all the stuff around the independent candidates. And so there was a lot of, I think, understandable dropping the ball in terms of paying attention to these changes. And so by the time they needed to now be implemented, it came as a shock to a lot of people.
I'm running out of time. Quickly, who or what is this election about? Let's start with the ANC quickly. If the ANC dips below 50%, is that trouble for Cyril Ramaphosa?
I'd like you to try. Well, not in ANC politics. It would be a new thing to want to use performance of a leader in office.
It happens there in the DA
as a mechanism to actually kick somebody out. And I think that it might be something that a faction is attempting to use, but I doubt that it would be viable enough internally within the ANC. But what the thing to watch is that the former presidents and whom they represent as a political constituency, maybe they knew, a move that says, because remember, this is how in the DA actually, the former elite party elites regained control. It was them saying, now we want into it because you've now...
Do you think the DA will do that? I've asked Helen Zille countless times. Are you going to institute an inquiry if the DA dips below, just like it was done with Musi Maimane? And her response is always, well, Musi did that himself, as if Musi was not put under pressure.
Well, I think that what's also going to happen there is that the whole leadership collective of the DA is owning this process. And I don't think they'll punish themselves.
All right, I'm out of time. Dr. Ongama Mtimka, Dr. Stembile Mbete, thank you so much for joining us. Here's a reminder of the question we've been asking you tonight on Face the Nation. Why is this election in particular so important for you? There's some tweets that have come through at Face the Nation SABC. Let's start with Maso on Twitter. In fact, Maso says this is important because it means I get to decide the future of this country. I get to have a say as to who presides over the affairs of this country. Vernon says, this time I'm voting with my head and not my heart for better governance. That's Jacques in Cape Town. Lighton says, I'm hopeful that this year's votes will bring change, as many South Africans are becoming more and more aware that a time of change is upon us, and that change can only be through our votes as a nation. And Ernest says, to have a completely new government in form of coalition is what is significant for me. I need a clean new government. That's what Ernest says. Thank you so much for your tweets. We'll be back on Thursday at 8 p.m. Thanks for watching, and happy voting day tomorrow morning. Cheers.